Welcome back to Lens on Africa. It's about that time where we have our conversation, but before we do, here is a short backgrounder to set the pace.
The need to ensure peace and sustainable development in our world is most desirable. Living together in harmony is all about accepting differences and having the ability to listen to, recognize, respect, and appreciate others. May 16 is declared International Day of Living Together in Peace by the United Nations General Assembly. Beyond just a day set aside for recognizing peaceful coexistence, peace and peacefulness should be a lifestyle for all, especially in our continent, Africa. More than ever, through policy advocacy and cross-cutting programming activities, countries ought to continue to foster unity in diversity and combat all forms of discrimination based on religion or belief, race or ethnicity, class and leadership to achieve sustainable peace and progress. Issues of conflict avoidance, resolution, and more will form our focus on the interview segment of Lens on Africa today.
Joining our conversation today are Principal Research Fellow at the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Abuja, Dr. Philip Hayab John. Welcome to Lens in Africa, sir.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. All right. Also joining us is the Industrial Liaison Africa Center for Excellence and Technological Enhanced Learning at Estel National Open University, Nigeria, Professor Sam Sma. Welcome to Lens in Africa, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Philip, I'm going to ask you the very important question. We seem to live in a global era of conflict, but in Africa, wars and violent armed conflict seem to be a perennial issue. Why is this so?
Well, that is maybe a difficult question to answer because it's not a straightforward response. Okay. However, what is evident is that most African leaders have actually, the leadership in Africa, it appears, has not done what is needed, because if you look at some of the causes of conflict, they have to do with injustice, they have to do with bad governance, you're talking about land issues, you're talking about scarce resources, and because people on the continent have actually had their dreams dashed. This is about 60 years after independence for most African countries. People are still struggling to meet ends meet. People will, someone will go to the university, graduate after so many years, and it's very difficult for them to find something to do. Now, when you have restive youths all over the place, and then somebody comes around and sponsors maybe a divisive ideology, it is very easy to find people easily go into war. The thing is that the armed struggle on the continent, yes, it has so many reasons. Some of the issues maybe might be even religious, some of these issues might be ethnic. But then when you have people who are ready, then the youths who are ready to be used, and there's a level of ignorance in some parts of Africa, particularly where this armed conflict actually holds sway. In most areas where there is a high level of education, it is not easy to find the teeming number of youths that you find in areas where there is a high level of ignorance.
So from what you just said, I can take back that leadership and education, the deficit in leadership and education are prime cause for this perennial conflicts in Africa.
Yes.
Professor Sam Sma, what's your take on this?
Well, thank you very much. I think we need to talk about the levels of inequality that exist at different strata of society. Whether at the clan level, at the family level, at the community level, and of course at the national level, we see varying degrees of inequalities that exist between gender, between classes, between what one can say religious boundaries and all those things that tend to divide people. And of course, that in itself gives rise to mistrust, like you said, even on leadership. Yeah. Because once people get to, let's say, the National Assembly, we don't all have to be there, you know, for us to be able to have access to resources equitably. So some who get there don't really remember that there are other people. So their first priority is themselves, their families, their clans, and maybe their social classes and their friends and so on. And at that level, you just discover mistrust has begun to build up. And of course, this gives rise to the conflict that we see Africa so pregnant with. Africa is almost like a graveyard where death doesn't really mean anything anymore. I mean, people just being killed in numbers, in hundreds, and it just, I mean, someone will even tell you that it's just a few, you know. Yeah, so no sanctity of life, and it's all because of the fact that inequality in the administration of the justice that is required, you know, when people infringe on the rights of others is starkly absent. And so this is, for me, very, very key in explaining the dynamics in the conflicts which has mutated over the years into some very complex situations that are very, very hard now for states in Africa to even handle. And readily, you know, you have those things to use. The machineries are there.
From what you're saying, two key issues, inequality and selfishness in terms of those who have been appointed to office to adjudicate either resources or justice. And these are triggers for this conflict. Dr. Philip, I'm going to ask this question. If you look across the African continent, we have something called the strongman phenomenon. Africa, traditionally, we had chiefs and kings who lorded it over the people. It doesn't seem that we evolved a system of thinking that is amicable and supportive of the democratic process, where people are not treated as subjects, but treated as fellow human beings in a struggle, and leaders are entities or servants that are foisted up to push the general welfare of the people. What do we need to do to develop a system of thinking that supports modern life in Africa?
Thank you. Well, from my study of Africa, one of the challenges would be that maybe we missed it. Because in most African societies of old, the system was such that it had checks and balances.
Okay.
In most of the societies. Yes, agreed. There were some of these societies that were feudal, where the chief had absolute power and could do whatever they wanted to do. But even at that, there were checks, because some of these chiefs could be easily overthrown, and it was, at that time, it was not going to be seen as an ethnic.
There were council members
who would deliberate matters and could actually caution the chief or the king. But what we have actually done now is that we've lost some of our values. Our values in the old would be, it was about us, not about me. So it was communal. If I would marry, for instance, my uncles were going to provide those cows, if I had to use cows to pay, or goats that I needed to pay, or maybe chickens, and whatever there was needed. If you had any bereavement, people will come with support system that will cushion the effect. But there came a time where we came in contact with the West, and I think we copied wrongly the value system, because the Western world has checks and balances. But when you look at what we have today in our democracies in Africa, it is more or less just democracy in name, but not democracy in structure or in pattern. Because if democracy were to be, or in Africa, was something that we had actually adhered to, then we would not have the winner takes it all. We will not have people, you know, for instance, you see somebody who has maybe someone with a retinue of policemen following just one person, and then others are there somewhere with nobody to protect them. So for me, I would say that Africans actually have lost their value system, which was supposed to ensure equity, which was supposed to ensure equality, as Prof had just mentioned. From the society that I come from, we didn't have even a kingdom or a king. We had a chief, and the implication is that a chief is chosen. That is to say that if anybody was our leader and refused to do what our people thought was what we desire, such a person could actually be brought to the council and, if possible, removed and be replaced. So if you know you can easily be removed and be replaced, it calls you to order and makes you to be responsible to the people who have chosen you. Okay. But in this context that we are, unfortunately, I would not say with confidence that our leaders are actually responsible to us as they should have.
I often like to say, I think you're absolutely right. I like to say that we've confused democracy with elections. Elections is just a part of the process. The fact that we have elections doesn't necessarily mean that you have democracy. You have to check the structures, the system, the will of the people and the progress of the people to know if you have a thriving democracy, if you have a democracy at all. Professor, I'm going to ask this question. A peaceful coexistence is essential for success at any level, social, political, economic. Why does it seem that we do not have, we're not incentivized enough to pursue peaceful coexistence at practically all costs? Why are we so easy to resort to violence and all those oppressions or things that generally will lead down to the threatening of the very peace that we need to progress?
This is a very, very big question that has to do with a huge theoretical thesis, which I don't want to take us to. Okay. But let me quickly say that we have over the years overrated the theory of development. Okay. Where we think that just anything that is in black and white is workable. We've not been able to take into consideration the social fiber, the fabrics, the structures, and the systems and the value, that operate amongst our people. So just copying anything from the West, we just provide an opportunity for them to come and try to implement development policies, and which really flies ahead of people, flies over people's head, does not have a touch with their culture, does not have a touch with their thinking. And so the system that we have put on ground, whether it is the military, whether it is security, whether it is education or political structures, simply do not reflect the aspirations of the people. And so that appears to have actually been the major factor where you see this collapse, of the institutions. And so it makes it practically impossible to secure peace. Okay, let's say maintain peace, sustain peace over a community, what I often call geosociological system.
So if I hear you correctly, you're talking that there's a breakdown of the human system, a lack of connection between what is actual and what is theoretical. Absolutely. And so we just run with what the West hands or what a certain body hands over to us without breaking it down to the local level. Is this practical for these people? How best should we?
Exactly, and that is right, because that's where we miss it most of the time. And so some level of civilization clashes. Yeah. We I say we have overrated the theory of development, and that for me means that where we ought to be, we are not. Yes. Where we ought to be, we are not. We have actually gone behind, very far behind what I would call the primitive stage of existence. Wow. Where so many things that we didn't even practice at that time. Yeah. We just find them doing them in spite of technology, in spite of democracy, in spite of education, in spite of religious development. I call religious development because we keep modernizing, we keep seeing things, we keep creating, avenues and structures that could make people to relate, and then these structures don't really sustain.
Wow. We could talk about for more than an hour about what you just said now, but because of time, we're going to move on quite quickly. Dr. Philip, I'm going to ask, women and children are the most affected and they suffer terribly, sometimes inconceivably so, when there's breakdown of peace and there are conflicts across the nation. What can we do to have peaceful coexistence, a lifestyle, not just, we seem many times to be responding to conflicts, and it's not enough investment being made to ensure that, like he said, what can we begin to do practically to begin to ensure that there is a higher possibility that when disagreements arise, we will tilt towards the pendulum of peace?
Yeah, thank you. Women are key in most societies, and in society when it comes to raising the next generation of people. And in one of the conferences we had last year, it was on the role of women in curbing insecurity in Nigeria. One of the key issues we talked about was that it was time for women to actually come to terms with the fact that we need to raise children from the cradle who believe in peace, or people with the value of peace. For instance, in some of our communities today, particularly say in Kaduna State and other areas in Nigeria, you have areas that are exclusively Muslims and areas that are exclusive Christians. These are very dangerous moves, very dangerous developments. I didn't grow up like that. I grew up in an environment where everybody lived and everybody belonged. But because of continuous crisis, we have now gotten to this point. Now, children need to be raised to understand that we are not homogeneous everywhere that we are. In fact, during one language conference, we were trying to find out if we could find a community in Nigeria where everybody was actually homogeneous nowadays, and it appears that it is very unlikely. Now, if people are no longer homogeneous because of intermarriages, because of work, then how is it how we should be able to utilize this our diversity for our own growth? Raise children to believe that the other person was as good as they are, and if we are all on this kind of terms, then we are already on a good path.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philip.
Sorry, let me just add a little
bit. Before you do, we're out of time, so I will just give you about 30 seconds to round up so we can move.
Just to say that somebody was born in 1980. This year he's 43 years old.
Yes.
From that moment, you can imagine the consequences of the cumulative impact of crisis and conflict, at all levels of existence. So a 43-year-old person born into crisis, raised in crisis, is living in crisis, and his future is unpredictable because of the degree and diversity of crisis and conflict around him.
10 seconds.
So that person is not going to live a very peaceful life. You can't give what you don't have.
Dr. Philip.
Nigerians need to embrace peace. Africans need to embrace peace. With our education today, compared to how our parents lived in the past, it is high time we came to this fact that without peace, we will not be able to develop. And it's unfortunate if we continue to live in conflict. Many people will die, many resources, many sources of life will be cut off, and that is not good for development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philip. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
And Professor Sam, thank you very much for being our guest. We hope forward to seeing you again and extending this conversation even further.
Thank you.
Okay.